All right. Can you guys hear pretty good? All right, sounds good. Welcome to Developing on Windows Azure, how to cloud enable your ASP.NET applications. My name is Syed Hashimi. I'm a program manager at Microsoft on the Visual Studio web team. On the screen behind me, you can see my contact information. You've got my Twitter handle, my email, and my blog. If you've got any questions, feel free to contact me here. And during the session, if you've got any questions, feel free to send me a tweet. I'll take a look at the timeline at the end. Don't worry about writing down my Twitter ID, because I'll keep it in the bottom right-hand corner of all the slides. So today we'll talk about ASP.NET and Azure. With Azure, you've got three choices of hosting your ASP.NET applications. You've got the Azure Websites offering, which Scott Guthrie announced on June 7th. This is a great option if you're looking to take your existing ASP.NET applications and quickly and easily publish them to Azure. We have a free account. You can create up to 10 websites and one SQL database for free. In this session, we'll primarily focus on the Azure Websites offering. We've also got cloud services. So cloud services are a really great option for multi-tiered applications. With cloud services, you can create two types of roles. You can create a web role if the primary responsibility is to serve web content. You can also create a worker role if the primary responsibility of that role is to process background jobs or pull information off of a queue. We will talk a little bit more about cloud services later on in the talk. And then your third option are virtual machines. Virtual machines are a really great option if you've got some existing applications running on-prem and you really just want to take an existing server that you have and just publish it to Windows Azure. You can take your VHD. It can be either Windows or it can be Linux. For this crowd, you guys will probably be uploading VHDs. So what does it take to get started with Azure Websites? There's actually three simple steps to getting started. First, you create your website in the portal, and then you download the published profile. You'll use Visual Studio to import that profile, and then publish the website to Windows Azure. All right, so now, where do you get the bits that's required to actually perform these three steps? You'll just go to windowsazure.com, and then on the Develop tab, you'll find .NET, and then under .NET, you can click the big blue Install button. After you click that, you'll be prompted for either Visual Studio 2012 RC or Visual Studio 2010. So everything that I'm going to show you in Visual Studio 2012 RC is actually available today in Visual Studio 2010. So all the new published dialog, you can actually get all that for 2010 at this link above. All right, so now let me switch back to my development machine. All right. So what we'll do now is I'll go ahead and create a new project. I'll create an MVC4 project here. And we'll call it TechEd contacts. And let me actually move this to another folder. All right. So here what we'll do is we'll create a contact manager application. I've selected MVC4. Now I can pick from the different project templates that I have available here. I'll pick Internet application. Okay, all right, so creating the project, and then what I'm going to show you guys actually involves creating a website that uses a database as well. So what I'll do is I'll create a simple contact manager application using Entity Framework Code First with EF Code First migrations. How many of you guys are using Code First right now? All right, so we've got a few. What about the Code First migrations? Anybody out there using those? All right, so we've got a handful. So the Entity Framework Code First is it's basically kind of like an ORM that you can use in order to access data in your database, and you'll actually keep all the schema for the database right inside code. And then, in order to manage updating the database, you actually use the code-first migrations. And that is integrated with the publishing experience as well. So that's what I'm about to show you guys. So I'll right-click and then say Add Class, and then I'll say Contact. This will be my initial model. So I'll create a new property here, so ID. This is what code first will use to identify this row. And let's say first name. Okay, last name. All right, so I've created a simple model. Now I need to create an MVC controller in order to access this model and serve the views and everything. So I'll right-click on the controllers folder. Actually, before I do this, let me kick off a build. When you create these classes, you actually have to build before they start showing up in the those template dialogues. So let's try this one more time. So add controller contacts. And then here you can see that we can pick a template. So one of the choices that I have is to create an MVC controller with read-write actions using Entity Framework. So I'll go ahead and pick that. And now we can select the model class, contact. And then finally, you can specify the EF data context class. If you don't have one, you can select new data context. And I'll just call this contacts context and click OK. So now the MVC project is looking at my contact model. It's going to create the context for me, and then it will create my contacts controller, as well as views for create, read, update, and delete. So first, let's take a look at the contacts context. So this is the EF code first context. This is basically the exact same thing that I would have manually hand-coded if I was going to create this guy. And then another thing, let's take a look at the contacts controller. So here I'll collapse to definition. And we can see now we've got our index, details, create, the post for create, same for edit, and then delete. And then finally we've got a dispose method here to free up the context that it's using. And then we can also see that it scaffolded my create, delete, create, and so on views. All right, so let's run this app. Actually, before I run the app, what I'll do is I want to go ahead and set up the EF code first migrations, and I want to get my database prepared. So what I've done is I've opened the NuGet package manager console. Are you guys familiar with NuGet? All right, we've got a few hands showing up. So NuGet is a way that we are distributing basically application building blocks. So we've got a website, it's nuget.org. And there's two ways that you can pull down these building blocks. One is inside this console here, and the other way is you can actually right-click and say Manage NuGet Packages. And on this screen, you'll see all the packages that are available online. So in 2012, when you actually do File New Project, we're including a bunch of NuGet packages. This is what enables us to kind of keep all the files up to date. For example, jQuery, if you're using 2010 and you do File New Project, you'll notice that it pulls in an old version of jQuery. So we're going to be using a NuGet package in order to make sure that we are delivering fresh content to all those projects. All right. So we've already got the Entity Framework package included. That was included when I created my EF. The MVC projects will pull in EF by itself. All right, so the first command that I'm going to type is enable. Actually, let me run the zoom out real quick so you guys can see all these commands. So I've got enable migrations. This is the first command that I'll execute. What this will do, it will create a migration configuration class for my contacts context. So this will be used when I'm publishing my application or updating my database. And then the next command I'll use is add migration. And then I'll give it a name. So in this case, I'll just call it initial, since this is the first migration that I'll create. So the concept behind these migrations is how can I migrate from the previous version of the database to the current version? So every migration will have both an up and down method. The up method represents what it takes to go from the previous state to the new one. So here we can see that it creates my contacts table, and then with the columns ID, first name and last name. And then inside the down method, it just has a drop table there. All right, now I'm going to update my local database. And that command is just update database. You go ahead and click enter on that. So it will determine what is going to be the runtime connection string for that context. With EF, if you don't have a connection string inside web config, it will generate a default connection string for you. In this case, it's going to be using local DB, and we could actually see that database over here as well. So let me go into the Server Explorer, and I'll connect to my local DB instance, and then we'll see that it just created a new database. So database, and then here's my contacts context. All right. So now let me go ahead and run this application. I'll create a couple contacts here, and then what we'll do is we'll see what do we need to do in order to publish this to Windows Azure. All right, so I'll go to contacts. So now these are all the views that were automatically scaffolded for me when I did the add controller method. All right, first name, say Syed, last name Hashimi. All right, so it looks like it's working pretty good. Let me try another one. All right, so everything is working great. So now, what is it actually going to take for me to take this application and then publish it along with its database to Windows Azure? So now we've got the Windows Azure websites. When you log into the portal, on the bottom left-hand side, or actually on the bottom, we've got the command bar. You can click on the New button, and from here we can see those three things which I mentioned before. We've got the websites, the cloud services, and also the virtual machines. So this is where you'll go to create new instances of all those items. So I'll click on website. We've got three options here: quick create, create with database, and then from gallery. In this case, I'll select create with database. The quick create will just create a website without a database, and then the from gallery will allow you to create an application based off of one that's in our app gallery. So for instance, if you wanted to create a new instance of DAS blog or WordPress on your Azure website, you can go to create from gallery, and then it will just set everything up for you. But this case, we'll try create with database. Now I have to give it a unique name, so I'll say Syed TechEd, and then it will verify that the name is available. So for my case, I have multiple subscriptions. For most people, they only have one, so you probably don't have to worry about that. And then I'll select create new SQL database. We can also select our regions. Move on to the next tab. So here is where I'll specify my database settings. So I'll say I want to create a new SQL database, and then go to the next tab. Specify the admin username and credentials. You're probably going to want to remember these, but if for some reason you need to reset them, you can actually reset them in the portal. So I'll go ahead and set these. All right. And the checkbox here that says allow Windows Azure services to access the server, what this does is it enables the Azure publishing roles and your website to talk to that database and anything else that's running in Azure under your account, but nobody else would be able to contact it. You can actually set your own custom firewall rules as well if you needed to. And now we can see that the website and the database are being created. This should just take probably about a minute. Okay, so now it's done. So I can go ahead and drill into this website. So what happened was it created a website in Azure, it created a SQL database, and then linked those two together. So now that they're linked, when I go to the dashboard for the website, I can get a quick glance of what's happening for both the website and also the database that's linked to it. Here there's no data showing up in the chart because it's a brand new website, but you can actually, let me go to one that's existing. Maybe I've got some existing data here to kind of show you guys. These images are actually checkboxes, so you can check and uncheck them. This is kind of like it's not very noticeable, so I wanted to go ahead and point that out. So you can examine those specific things. So on the right-hand side, we've got a quick glance for the website, and one of the options is to download a published profile. So I'll go ahead and select that option. I'll download the published profile. I'll save it into my downloads folder. And then this is the file that we'll actually use to import into Visual Studio. So we've completed step 1, which was to create the website. Now let me move on to step 2. So I right-clicked on the WAP and said Publish. This is our new Publish experience, which is also available in 2010. And then I'll select Import. This is the new published profile, which I just downloaded. We can see the timestamp, but it's in Pacific time. So let me go ahead and click Open. And on this screen, we'll see all of our web deploy settings. You don't have to really be concerned with what these settings are, but you can click Validate Connection just to double check that everything is configured correctly. We can see the green check mark, so I'll move on. On this tab is where I can configure my database settings. We can see that it automatically detected my EF code first context, and in the drop-down I can pick the connection string which came in through my published profile. If I wanted to give it a different connection string, you can either type it in or you can use the connection string builder from the ... And then there's also a checkbox for Apply Code First Migrations. I'll check that. So with Code First Migrations, there's 2 ways that you can specify that the migrations should be executed at runtime. The first way is to write some code inside your application that specifies that. And the other way is to modify web config. So inside your web config, you'll create an entity framework section, and then you'll give it the names for your context and the context configuration, and then it will go ahead and kick off all the code first migrations. We've simplified that into just a checkbox, so you don't have to worry about all the XML that goes into your web config. If you check this checkbox, when you publish your application, what we'll do is we'll take your web config and then transform that on the fly, and then the version that goes onto your web server has the initializers set up for code first. We can also see that the publish dialog detected the default connection, which is in my web config. I'm not going to use that database, so I'm not going to set anything on it. Well, actually, I can go ahead and just pick the connection string. It doesn't really matter, but we could ignore that if we wanted to. So now I'll go to the Preview tab, and I just clicked Start Preview. So here we can see all the file operations which will be performed when I publish my application. In this case, all the action methods is set to add. So there's 3 options here. There's add, update, or delete. In this case, I've never published this application, so everything is going to be an add. The next time that I publish this, I would expect that only a few of these files actually get updated, because this is an incremental publish with web deploy. All right, so let me go ahead and click Publish. And now what's happening is it's contacting the server, sending out all your files to it, and then it will automatically launch your website once the publish has succeeded. So at this point, ASP.NET is spinning up, and then when I go to my contacts, I'll access my EF code first context for the first time. This is when my migrations will get kicked off, and now we can start creating new contacts here. So let me create a new context on the server. So I'll say Syed Hashimi, and let me just create one more just to double check. All right, so we'll create Matt's here. Okay. All right, cool. So now we've got an ASP.NET application that uses a database published to Windows Azure, and I'm pretty sure that we could have done all this like probably within less than 2 minutes. You know, there used to be a lot of pain points in publishing to Windows Azure before, but now we're trying to make it really simple for you guys to take your existing apps and then run on Windows Azure. One of the other things that I'd like to go ahead and share with you guys is the Azure Websites offering is a little bit different than normal hosting. So when you run your application in Windows Azure, it's running in almost a full trust mode. It's full trust with just a little bit of modifications. We actually worked with the Windows team and Microsoft Research in order to create a new technology to actually sandbox your application. Because one of our goals when we set out to create Azure Websites was we wanted to be able to take all existing ASP.NET applications and then simply host them on Azure Websites. So a lot of applications don't run under medium trust for one reason or another. So we hope that a lot of your applications will just work in Azure Websites, even if they don't work under medium trust. All right, so that was that. So now, you know, publishing an application once is really great, but what if we actually change the model and then maybe the views? So let's go ahead and do that. What I'll do is I'll change my model and then show you what would it take to incrementally publish my database and then my application itself. So let's say we'll create an address field here, and then I'll go ahead and build it, and then I'll actually update my local database. I'll do that by creating another migration. I'll call this address, and I'll use the add migration command in the package manager console again. This will create my second migration, and here it'll add the column for address. It'll drop the column inside the down method, and then I'll update my local database. All right, so now we've updated the database. We could actually verify that in the SQL Server Object Explorer here. So contacts, and then we can see the address column was created. All right. So after I've done that, now I'm just going to re-scaffold my context controller again. Since I haven't made any changes, I know that it's safe to re-scaffold this. If I did make any changes, then I'd want to manually override all these files myself. But in this case, I'll just take what's automatically generated. All right, cool. Let me run it one time, make sure that everything works, including the address field, and then we'll go from there. All right, so go to contacts, create new. All right, 1, 2, 3 Food Street. Okay. All right, now we can see that everything works locally. Now let's see what happens when I take this application and then republish it. So let me go ahead and do another preview. So now I can see most of the operations here are actually set to update. So in this case, it identified the files that were modified and then determined that there was an existing file that's already there, so they need to be updated. And then let me click Publish here. So all the changes have been published. Now my website opens automatically. I'll go to Contacts here. And then we'll create a new item, make sure that the address works. All right. All right, Bar Street. Okay, so it was created. So we created an application with a database, published it to Windows Azure, made a change to both the model and the data, and then republished, and then everything just kept working. So was that cool or what? All right, back to the other slide. So now that was our demo for creating and publishing your first ASP.NET app. All right, so now we can also take a look at what would it take in order to automate publishing to Windows Azure from the command line. All right, so from that, one of the big changes that we made in the web publish side of the house was how web publish profiles are being stored inside your project. In 2010, we had a file that was called projectname.publish.xml, and inside that XML file, all of your published profiles along with their settings were being stored. Those files were not added to the project, and they were not designed to be used in a team environment. So even if you check them in and multiple people were working on them, it actually would kind of clash with each other because the password was stored encrypted in that file. But we've solved all those problems. Now in the project, if you expand out your properties and then go to Publish Profiles, for VB, this would be My Project instead of Properties. Under the Publish Profiles folder, you can see now we've got all the published profiles actually defined here. And if you're familiar with MS Build, you'll notice that this is now an MS Build file as opposed to just a standard XML file with key value pairs. So what that means is two things. One, I can use this file to automate publishing to Windows Azure or any endpoint that is specified here. And the other thing that means is you can start creating, you can extend or customize the published profile directly inside each particular profile itself. Now, when you publish with the publish dialog or from the command line, those customizations will be respected. So kind of the scenario that I see there is if you're working in a team, maybe 5 guys, maybe one of them is interested in kind of tweaking the publish process. He'll modify this file, check it in, and then everybody gets the same publish experience, whether they're doing it from the command line or from the publish dialog itself. All right, so let me open up a command window here. So I'll go to the directory for the solution. Okay, I'll say MS Build, TechEd contacts, and then there's a few properties that I need to pass in to MS Build. If you were familiar with how to automate web publishing back in 2010, you probably knew that you'd have to pass in 6 or 7 cryptic MS Build properties, one of them being MS Deploy Service URL. They're actually all the same properties which are shown up here. Web Publish Method, MS Deploy Service URL, Deploy IIS App Path, and 3 or 4 other very confusing property names. So we've greatly simplified this. So I'll say deploy on build equals true. Publish profile. And then I'll give it the name for my profile, which is just the file name. So I'll copy that here. And then I'll give it the password. All right, so I will actually copy this from the file that I downloaded, which is here. Yep. All right, so now let me grab this password, and I'll paste it here. Okay, before I do that, let me actually make a change to the index page. That way we can see that the change actually went through. So if I go to Views, Contacts, we'll create a header. All right, so now go ahead and publish this out. Okay, so now it's actually building my application and then starting to publish it. Yep. Let me fix that. Publish. Oh, yeah, I did, right? Yep. I misspelled publish profile. All right. Thanks to whoever said that. All right, let's try it again. Okay, so, all right, I missed the point. Oh, actually, there's another property. So allow to pass, allow untrusted certificate. I'm not, when you publish from the Visual Studio command, when you publish from the dialog, we show a checkbox that says there's an issue with this certificate. I'm not actually sure why I'm getting that from the command line. But let me pass in the property that says allow untrusted certificate. Then it goes through. Okay. All right. For some reason, it's having an issue to validate the certificate that is being passed into it. I'm not sure why this is not working. It's probably a user error, but I'll go ahead and move on. But it should. This basically should be working. The quote and the password. Okay. Let me try that one time. All right. So sorry about the demo fail here. Let's try it one more time. This should work. All right, here we go. Okay, cool. All right, thanks. All right, so I had a user error there. Let me try it one more time. Go back to contacts. We should definitely work on the error message when you have a bad password. I'll make a note about that when I go back to Redmond. All right, so we can see just modified. Not taking into account my user errors, that was pretty simple. Usually you don't even have to remember those properties. It's very easy. Deploy on build, publish profile, and then password. All right, cool. So this actually is a lot simpler than what it was in 2010. All right. So switching back. So we just showed how to automate web publishing. So now what we can do is we can take a look at what would it take if I had my project hosted in the tfspreview.com. How would I automate publishing that from TFS to Azure? So that's what we'll look at now. I've already got an account set up with hosted TFS. I'll go ahead and log into that. So syed.tfspreview.com. Oops. Doesn't exist. What? This is kind of interesting. Okay. Let's create another one, I guess. Oh, sign out. It's got me signed in with the wrong account somehow. So I'm using multiple live IDs as well. So I think that's kind of an issue. Oops. All right, syed.tfspreview.com, and then I'll log in with my other live ID. All right, so here I'll go ahead and create a new team project from TechEd. All right, description. And now this is creating a new TFS team project on tfspreview.com. So this is an offering that we have available right now. It's in preview mode, and it is free for now. I'm not sure what the pricing is going to be later on. They haven't made any announcements about that, but so this will take just probably about a minute to create my team project. And then we'll go ahead and link it to Visual Studio 2012 and then show you how can we easily automate publishing, including all the EF Code first stuff that we talked about from hosted TFS to Windows Azure. Have any of you guys heard of TFS Preview? Okay, all right, good number of you guys. All right, cool. Is there any questions out there while we're going? Okay, that's a good question. So the question was, all the publishing stuff that we just showed, is it only relevant to Azure, or is it also relevant to hosters and on-prem? So everything that I just showed you is all built on top of MS Deploy, and there's nothing specific to Windows Azure here. So we've partnered with a number of hosters to create these published settings files that you can download. And you can download and import them either into VS or WebMatrix, and then just publish from there. So no, there's nothing special about Windows Azure. All right, so now we can see my team project has been created. I'll go back into VS and connect these two together. So inside my Team Explorer, I'll go ahead and say, go back to source control. settings, and then we go to team, connect to, and then I'll pick my project here from TechEd, and then I'll go ahead and check this guy in. I'll add it to source control. All right, so that sounds good. And then when I add this to source control, we should also enable the NuGet package restore. What the NuGet package restore enables is for CI servers to go and download all your NuGet packages. That way you don't have to store them all inside source control itself. So now I will check this in. Yep. Okay, initial check-in. All right, so now it's checking all these files in, and then after the check-in is done, I'll go back to the Azure portal. Let me just go ahead and sign in while that's happening. I'll sign in on Chrome, that way I don't have any identity issues going on. All right, so now the check-ins should be completed. Okay. All right, cool. So now what we need to do is take the website that I created, link this with TFS preview, and then go ahead and publish out to it. So it was Syed TechEd. And then back on the quick glance, we can see that I've got set up TFS publishing. We also have an option for Git, and but in this case, I'll click on Set Up TFS Publishing. I'll give it the name for the account that I already have, and then I'll click Authorize, and then click Accept. So at this point, what's happening is Windows Azure is talking to TFS Preview and then allowing that communication to occur. And it selects, it shows all my TFS projects, which I have. I'll pick the one which I just created from TechEd, and then check it. So now these two are being linked together. So a number of things are going to be performed here. One being that a new build definition will show up in TFS after this. All right, so we can see that the link has been completed. If I go back into Visual Studio and navigate to builds, we can see that a new build definition has been set up here for me. Back on the portal, if you notice, it says TFS will build and deploy your project to Windows Azure on your next check-in. And that happens through this build definition which was just created. So let's take a look at this build definition. So I'll right-click and say Edit Build Definition. And then if I go to the Trigger tab, this is what is going to control how often this build is kicked off. So there's a few different options here, one of them being continuous integration. So every time you check in, a build will get kicked off, which will actually build your project. It will run all your unit tests, and if everything succeeds, then it will actually publish your project to Windows Azure. Since we customized the publish process using the Visual Studio publish dialog, there's one additional setting that we need to make here. So in the Web Deploy Publish profile under Azure Websites, we have to navigate to the profile which we just created. Okay, so that's under the Properties Publish Profiles folder. And then I'll pick the Web Deploy one because that's got the configuration set up for my EF code first, and click OK. Go ahead and save that guy out. We are working with the TFS team to basically avoid this particular step as well. So if you imported a published profile into VS, and if it has the name of site-web deploy, we'll automatically pick that guy up in TFS preview. But we're not quite there yet. That is something that we're working on. So now, going back to my view, let me update this for just modified from TFS. All right, so what I'll do is go ahead and check in my changes, and then this should kick off a build. And then that will actually kick off a publish inside TFS. All right, so the check-in is happening. Let me go back to my builds, and then we'll see that there should be a build queued up Yeah, here we go. All right, so now we've got a build queued up. So let me open that on that side, and then what I'll do is leave this Azure website up on the right-hand side. So with Windows Azure websites, when you publish from either TFS or from Git, the Deployments tab, which is the tab that I'm on right now, will actually light up and start showing whatever deployments that you've made, and it will show you the active deployment, and then it will enable you to roll back or roll forward based on where you are with those deployments. Okay, so this actually is very cool. So what's happening right now is in TFS running on Azure, the build has now been requested, and it looks like it actually has gotten kicked off already. So in a moment, what you'll notice is the screen on the right-hand side will light up, and it will say, hey, I've noticed that you're starting to deploy from TFS, and then you can actually monitor the progress in the Azure portal as well. And then, okay, here it goes. So now it noticed that a build is being kicked off in TFS, and then we can monitor it on both sides. I think this is a really cool integration that we've got here from hosted TFS to Azure. If you were to try to do this manually, it would not be super complicated, especially the support that we now have with the published profiles and automating them. But this definitely makes it super easy to just take your existing apps and then just publish them out with TFS. So this should take just about another minute, and then the deployment will succeed, and then we'll take a look at the result. But this is actually something that we're working on to bring on-prem as well. Is it possible to do this with your own TFS server? Yeah, exactly. So if you wanted to do this from your own TFS server, the way that you would do that today is to go back into your build definition and then say edit. And then on your process, you've got your MS deploy, your MS build arguments. So what you would have to do is inside your MS build arguments to pass in those properties which I showed you before, the publish profile, deploy on build, and then your password. That's how you would do it today. So it's not incredibly difficult, but this makes it a lot simpler. All right, cool. So now the deployment has succeeded, and let me go back to my contacts, and we'll take a look if we got the change or not. So I should see just modified from TFS. All right, cool. Just modified from TFS. So now every time I check in, a build and publish will be kicked off. What's that?
You did this using entity framework.
Right.
Would it be possible doing this with database projects?
Okay, so the question is, would it be possible to do this using database projects? So it's not possible right now. It's not possible right now. But let me actually show you the publish dialog one more time. So if I right-click on the web project and say publish, there's something that we'll notice here. So back on the settings tab, I've got my database, and then there's a checkbox for update database. This actually doesn't work in the RC build. The checkbox was there because we thought we would be able to get all the bits on hosters and on Windows Azure, but we were not able to do that. So this checkbox doesn't work right now. We are working to make this work by RTM, and the idea here is when you check the checkbox, we will look at your web config, the connection string, and then generate a DAC pack from that database. And this DAC pack format is a new format with SQL Server 2012. It's not the same DAC pack that we had before. So those DAC packs are a full representation of your database. We'll take that and then send it to the remote endpoint, and then it will compare the destination database with that DAC pack and then see what differences are made. And then go ahead and apply those differences. So back to your question about the database projects. We will have database project support, but it won't be when we RTM. It will be some number of months after that. But that is a very important scenario that we're looking at, especially through the context of TFS. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Thanks for that question. All right, so if I go back, we already saw from TFS. I think I saw another question over there. For test, stage, and production, there's a number of different ways that you could manage those. I could get back to you on that. We can go offline, but one of the good things about taking let's say if you've got your database with the EF code first, the entire schema and the entire migrations are stored inside your code. So you can use that in order to move from one environment to another. And then the same actually applies for DACPack. When we generate a DACPack, it's a full representation of your source database. It's not, a diff from your source database to the target. So it's a full representation. So you can use that to move from one environment to the other. It doesn't matter what version of the database is at your target. So. Okay, so for the Azure websites, we don't have any special support for staging production, but on the cloud services side of the house, we do. So you can create a staging slot and then a production slot, and then you can switch them, or you can actually specify, hey, I want to roll out this updated version. So there's a lot of different ways that we can service those on the cloud services side. So yeah, let's talk offline about your specific needs and then go from there. So is there any other questions about what we've already talked about? Can you speak up a little bit? Yes. So the question was, is the build definition created from Azure editable? So the answer is yes. And we actually saw that I edited it by giving the published profile name. So that build definition will be created when you initially link your Azure website to your TFS project. And then you can go ahead and party on that build definition. If you have any issues, you can delete the build definition and then unlink it in the Azure portal and then relink it. That should recreate the build definition back to its initial state. Okay, cool. All right. So any other questions out there? Because I'm probably going to move on to some other topics otherwise. Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. So if you guys take a look at what exactly just happened here, I think we showed it on the screen. It seemed very simple, but this is a very big problem that people face today. I've worked with my technical editors last year. He asked me, hey, how can we come up with a series that will incrementally publish a website and a database? And I want to be able to do that from a CI server or from command line. So I went home. I spent several hours creating an MS build file that would perform that task for him. And then I had to create a bunch of instructions. And then they took that and then created a series for it. But the point was that I'm kind of an expert in MS Build and also in MS Deploy, and I'm reasonably comfortable with databases and all that. And it still took me several hours in order to actually create that script. I can't imagine somebody that their primary responsibilities don't include MS Build or MS Deploy, how difficult something like that would be. So now we really simplified that into just a few clicks and then just a few command line parameters. I think that this is going to save people a lot of time and make your day-to-day activities a lot simpler. All right. So going back, so that was publishing a hosted service. So now let's talk about the cloud services. So we already kind of briefly touched on cloud services. With cloud services, you have different types of roles. You have a web role, which has IIS installed, and the primary responsibility of that is to serve up web content, and it will have ASP.NET and all that. And then you also have the option to create worker roles. Worker roles are designed to process background jobs, and cloud services are really great for multi-tiered applications. So let's say you've got a website that sells T-shirts. So on your website, when somebody orders a T-shirt, the order can be placed onto an Azure queue, and then you could have some background worker roles that are actually processing those queues and then fulfilling the orders. So creating your applications in that way and then hosting them on Azure will enable you to easily and quickly scale your applications. So in that scenario, if your website was the bottleneck, you could scale the website. If your worker roles were the bottleneck, you could scale all of your worker roles. So now let's take a look at what would it take in order to take my existing application and then publish it to an Azure cloud service. All right. So on this machine, I've got the Azure 1.7 SDK. So I'll right-click and then say Add Windows Azure Cloud Service Project. All right, so this is a new command which we've enabled with 1.7. This is also available on 2010. Now we can see that it's created a new Azure Service Project for us, automatically configured it with my web project here, and then I can right-click on this and say Publish. So from here, I'm going to have a very similar workflow as what we saw with the Azure websites. So you right-click and say Publish, and then you will sign in to download a published settings file and then import it into this dialog. This flow is just a little bit different in the sense that when you import that published settings file, it will actually take your Azure management certificate and then install it on your machine. So you only have to import that published settings file one time, and then after that you can publish it to any of the subscriptions that you have. So I've already actually done that. So I'll choose subscription 1. Actually, what I think I want to do before this is let me create a new slot for my cloud service on the Azure portal. That's over here. So if you remember, when we created the website, we went down to the command bar and click New. So I'm going to do a very similar thing here. So I'll go to Cloud Services. We've got a quick create or a custom create. For this case, I'll just do a quick create. 01, and pick the subscription that I need, and then go ahead and let that create. So now we can see that actually it's already created. So that was pretty fast. So now let me go back into Visual Studio, and then I should see that as an option. So I'll pick subscription 1, go to next, and then I can see my cloud service slots that I have. I think this is the one that I actually just created. Yeah, exactly. Okay, and then production or staging, going back to what we talked about before. And then we've got build configuration. One of the interesting aspects, or one of the interesting options that we have here is a checkbox for enable remote desktop. So if I check that checkbox, when I publish my application to Windows Azure, it will go ahead and enable remote desktop. And then I can also check, well, actually, let me go ahead and specify these. All right, so now that will enable the remote desktop. And then after I do that, I can actually enable publishing with web deploy. So when you check the checkbox for enable web deploy for all web roles, what that does is after you publish it, then you can right-click on your web project and say publish, and then just do a web deploy publish to it, which just takes a few seconds. If you're familiar with the publish to cloud services, what happens is it creates a CS pack, it pumps that up to Windows Azure. Windows Azure will take that CS pack and then expand it into a virtual machine, and then all that process takes a bit of time. It might take 4 to 5 minutes, or it might take 10 minutes. So what a lot of people do is they'll publish their application to the staging slot and enable remote desktop and web deploy. And then as they're developing it, they'll just republish with web deploy because it just takes a few seconds. And then after you've got everything running in Windows Azure, then you'll do a full republish to full Azure with the CS pack and all that. All right, so that is something that we worked on a number of months ago, actually. So then I can click Next, and then I can go ahead and click Publish here. So now it's starting to create the CS pack and all that. And then after that, the Azure activity window will show up, and we'll see that the application is being published to Windows Azure. Okay, so that was that. That's gonna take some time, so we'll go ahead and move on back to the slides. All right, so that was publishing to Windows Azure. We've got, I'll take probably about another 5 or 6. We'll talk a little bit about the storage options, and then we'll open it up to questions. All right, so what are the options that we have for storing data in Windows Azure? So we've got SQL Azure, which I showed you guys with the Contact Manager sample. So we were leveraging SQL Azure. There are some different limitations for SQL Azure versus what you'll find in an on-prem version of SQL Server, but it's very close to supporting the full set, and we are working to make that even better as time goes on. We also have blob storage. And then blob storage is great for, you can kind of think about it as a file system in the cloud. It will just store binaries, and you'll refer to them as by a string, which could represent a file name. I'll show you guys a demo of that if we have time. We also have table storage, and table storage is good for just keeping small amounts of information in Windows Azure. And then we also have queues, which we talked about before. So a queue is ideal if you want to pass information from one role to another. So back to the T-shirt sample, the website was creating orders on the queue and then passing them to the web role, or to the worker role. All right, so we talked a little bit about blobs. They're composed of containers and blobs. We can visualize blob storage as this. So you've got an account. Every account can have several containers. So if you're thinking about blob storage as a file system, you can think of your containers as being folders, and then your blobs being files. So every container can have many blobs inside of it. All right. So I've got a image viewer application. Let me switch back. I'll show you this application. I'll go ahead and run this. Using this application, I can upload images to it. There's 2 ways that I can add files. The files could either be stored on the local file system, which is what I have now. So if I do properties, and then if I zoom into it, we can see that this file is being stored on the local file system under a particular folder. But I also have a mode that I can set this application into that it will store all the images in blob storage as well. So I've got a flag inside my web config that says use Azure set to true, and then we can see that I've got a connection string for my blob storage. So the connection strings are composed of 3 parts: your protocol, the account name, and then the account key. So you can get all these values on the portal, and then I just copied and pasted them into my web config. Then I can show you how this works a little bit as well. So in my controller for the images, if I take a look, when this controller is created, it's passed in an image repository and also an image saver. So going back, I've got 2 flavors of that. One is the local web image saver, which just takes a file and then stores it on disk. And then it registers it with the database and returns it. And then the blob version of this, so here I call save image, and then a number of things happen. So first, it actually gets a reference to the container by name, and that is over here. So if I say I'll create a client that will point to my storage account, and then I'll get a reference to that container. Then I'll call create if not exists. So that will just make sure that the container is always there before I start accessing it. And then finally, I set the permissions to allow public access because I want the images to be served directly out of blob storage. So there's a number of reasons why you might want to store, things like images or other large files on blob storage, especially when you're using Azure websites. One reason being that when you create an Azure website, you only get 1 gig of space, so you could quickly go through that. The other being that if you serve it from blob storage, those servers are optimized for static content. They don't have cookies turned on or anything like that, so you're going to get better performance. And the third reason being that you actually will save compute cycles. So if you serve these from your Azure website, that's going to go against the compute cycles that you have versus blob storage. There's no compute cycles happening there. So that's that. And all right, so I switched the flag to say true, and then let me go ahead and run this, and then we'll see if the images are being uploaded and served from blob storage or not. All right. All right, so I'll go ahead and add an image. I've got one rule when I post photos of myself online. You've probably got the same rule. I have to look good. If everybody else, that's okay. All right, so let's take a look at what we have. All right, so let me go ahead and put it in full screen. We've got a few people which you guys might recognize. Does anybody recognize anybody in this photo? Yeah, we've got Mads here in the front. He's presenting here as well. And then towards the back, we've got Phil Hack, and we've got Jorge and Vishal as well, and then myself. So now let's take a look at where is this image actually being served from. So if I zoom in, we can see image viewer, .blob, so on and so forth. So this image is now actually being stored in blob storage and being served from blob storage. So that was pretty easy to start using the blob storage. And so with that, we've got a few minutes left. Let's go ahead and open it up for questions and then go from there. Let me actually slide back to the slides. What I'll do is I'll skip ahead. Okay, well, here's all my contact info. I'll go ahead and leave that. Open it up for questions. And, please fill out the evals. And I hope that you guys had a good time. So questions? For the Azure services can. Oh, the worker roles. Yeah. So in the worker roles, if you wanted something to happen on a scheduled basis, you would basically just configure that within your worker role itself.
Okay.
Right. Yep. So that is possible. I think you had a question.
I have a question about web publishing.
Okay.
You need to set a trusted certificate even for Windows.
That was wrong. No. That I was just trying that. It shouldn't have gotten that. The issue was really my password, but we had a bad error message, right? So we didn't need to set that. That's right.
I have problem with this. What are the requirements for certificate for the deployment service? Because even if I have trusted certificate authority and normal certificate for web server, I am required in Visual Studio and publishing to my own server to set this.
Okay, I see. So there is some specific requirements for how do you set up your certificates on the server. If you want, I'll give you my email, and then I can give you the steps of how to configure that. Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's got to be a trusted cert. Did you have a question? Okay. Yes. Right. Yep. Blob storage does have some amount of metadata that you can store over there. I'm not sure how powerful the searching mechanisms are for that, but yeah, if you've got any specific questions, I can kind of work with you on those too. All right, I think I saw some other hands up. Was there anybody else had any questions about anything that we talked about?
If you publish your site from TFS Premium to Azure, how long is your site offline?
Okay, so the question was if you publish a site from hosted TFS to Windows Azure, how long is your site offline? All right, so that's a great question. It really depends on how big your application is and then how big the diff is that's actually being published. So in my example, it was just a small set of files that were different, so it was very fast. But But your website actually won't be offline for any amount of time anyways. What happens is your web config will change, so your the app pool will be recycled, and then it will just come back up. So it won't be offline for very long at all. Right.
It does not take the site completely offline. Like if you place an offline file in your site, it will go down. But it doesn't.
No, it won't. Nope. Nope. That's right. But there are ways that that you could actually do that if you wanted to. So I could. I've got an example on my blog about how can you publish taking your site offline throughout the entirety of that publish. But you know, like if you've got a continuous integration or a continuous deployment that's happening, those deployments are so fast anyways that hopefully nobody would notice. Yep. All right.
How does it work if you scale up the site?
For Azure websites?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, great question. Let me show you back to the portal. How does that look like? All right, so now I'm in the portal. All right, so let me go back to my Syed test. That's my cloud service. So if I go to websites, go to scale. Okay, cool. So now we see a scale tab, and then we can see that I can scale this up to 3 instances. Okay, so when I said before that Azure websites are not just hosting on Azure, that we really did work to create some new technologies, and the scaling instance is one sample of that. Because if you notice, my image viewer application could actually write files to the disk. So you might be wondering, how does that work when I choose this scaling option over here? So what we do is, in an Azure website, whenever you write files to a disk, we're actually redirecting all those file writes to a shared location. And then when you scale, all the websites will actually be talking to the same location. So that's some new technology that we've created to enable that as well. Another way for the Azure websites for you to get dedicated resources is actually to switch it into reserved mode. This is a paid offering that we have, but if your Azure website is getting a lot of load and you just want to make sure that you're able to handle that, you can put it in reserved mode, which will give you a VM on your own, and then you can scale that as well. Yep.
What happens when you publish scale website?
Nothing. It's exactly the same, because we're just those files that the website is actually being served off of. All the scaled instances point to the same actual files. Yep. Yep. So that's exactly the same. Yep. All right. Is that it? We got one here. Well, these sites, they're not, see, that's the thing, they're not serving files from like a typical, they're not serving files that are on disk. They're serving files that are in a different location. So when those files get updated, they're just automatically reflected in the website themselves. But if you've got some transactions that are processing there, or if you're kind of concerned with that, then you might have to go down with the app offline approach, which was brought up earlier. So you could bring your app offline throughout the duration of that publish and then bring it back online. So if you did that with Azure websites, all your instances would go offline and then they'd all come back online at some later time. Yeah. So
how I can do it? Can I do it using the web publishing, take it offline, and for the time of being, how I can do it?
I actually have a very thorough blog post about this. So you have to actually do multiple web deploy syncs. So what you do first is you drop a app offline, and then when you publish your website, you make sure that that app offline is inside the payload. That way when it publishes, it doesn't delete it. And then after it's done, you do another web deploy sync to remove that file.
So I cannot automate it, for example, for each deploy, it will first take it offline, publish, and take it online.
No, you can automate that. Yeah, right. That's what I've got posted on my blog, how you can automate it. Yep. Yeah, exactly. All right, cool. That was a great question. All right, any others out there? All right, cool. I appreciate everybody coming out. If you've got any other questions, feel free to stop by, and then we'll go from there. All right, thanks everybody.